Web of Conspiracy. Here is your host, Adam Webb.
Hello, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Web of Conspiracy. I am your host, Adam Webb. I want to first off apologize. I am a little under the weather. I'm doing my best to put out a new episode for everybody today. Some kind of head cold something going on here. I don't know, but hopefully we'll be able to get through this here. No problems. So once again, I apologize for the way that I may sound. Just a few other things real quick before I get into the content for today. Hopefully, I've gotten a little bit of feedback back, but hopefully everybody is enjoying the improved sound of the show. Certainly doing my best, tweaking here, tweaking there, seeing what I can do to improve things a little bit. So bear with me in this process as I'm just trying to experiment with this new equipment that I have. So I'm doing the best I can to create the best sounding show that I possibly can. So just real quick, I want to thank everybody once again for tuning into the show, those who continue to come back and support the show, for those who give me feedback via email, via the website, via Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. I love getting any and all feedback that I possibly can, so please continue to do so. I appreciate it, good and bad. I certainly want to know if there's something that I could do to improve the show and do what I possibly can there. So just once again, want to thank everybody for continuing to support the show. For today, there is another topic that I really wanted to get into real quick here before getting into the main meat of the show, which is Giants. But I wanted to talk again a little bit more about the missing Malaysian Airlines flight. Here we are now. It's been almost a month since the plane went missing. I have little faith that whatever happened to this flight, I have little faith that anybody has survived it in terms of the passengers on board, whether it went down in the ocean, went down over land, whether it was hijacked, whether it has wound up in some secret military installation, as what some conspiracy theorists believe. I'm not sure. But at this point, it would seem highly unlikely that there are really any survivors left of that flight, regardless of what has happened to it. But we're running out of time to be able to kind of get any of those answers at this point, because I know that right now they're in the process of searching the subsurface of the ocean for the black box, and those black boxes only have a finite period of time before the transponders quit working. So we may never know what has happened to that flight, and it's what it's starting to look like more and more, that we're not actually going to get the truth, that we're not going to get any kind of real answers with regards to the real fate of that missing Malaysian Airlines flight 370. So for those who lost somebody, or my condolences. It's just a tragic situation for the families involved, because there is a certain degree of closure, but then again, there isn't. Especially when there seems to be a significant amount of debate as to what may have actually have happened. So it's unfortunate that these families may never really get to know whether there was a hijacking or what. It's hard to say. I know there's plenty of people who believe that this airline is in Pakistan, and at this point, I'm open to just about any kind of suggestion on this thing, because the further out we go, and it just seems like it's becoming less and less likely that we're actually ever going to locate this flight or the wreckage or anything resembling it. But we'll see. Nevertheless, hopefully we can find some sense of get some answers sooner rather than later, at least for the families involved. So, okay. So today's show is one that, as a kid, I was always fascinated by the topic of giants. I don't know what it was about the idea, but I always thought it was a really cool story. I thought it was really kind of a fascinating thing. And so I've always sort of had a little bit of an interest in the topic. So I've sort of been following the phenomenon for a number of years, and listening and watching, certainly some programs and people who really claim that giants actually truly did exist. Now, there's a number of, and this is rather unfortunate, but there's a number of fakes out on the internet. You can search anywhere in the internet and find a number of photoshopped photos of these supposed archaeological digs where these people have found supposed giant remains. It's unfortunate, but it would seem to be that I know at least one case there was a competition, but in other cases it seems that there's people having a little bit of fun with it. So that being said, you can't really trust all of the internet sources out there in terms of trying to find any kind of real information on giants. The best way to really investigate and try to ask yourself what is going on is to kind of look at some of the really older sources. In particular, there's a number of interesting stories from the late 1800s and early 1900s. So I'll get into some of those stories today, as well as touch upon if in fact giants did exist. What were they? We'll get into that here towards the end of the show. But some of the earliest documented stories about giants come from religious sources. The Christian Bible, the Jewish Torah, the Muslim Quran, all discuss at one point or another giants. Now, the question at that point begs, well, what was a giant to them? Well, that's a little vague in some cases. However, there are other stories where giants are, at least the size of giants are at least a little bit easier to determine, such as the story in the Bible of David and Goliath. You have a little bit better idea how large he was. But nevertheless, these stories persist, and certainly in Genesis in the Christian Bible, it very clearly states that there were giants on the earth in those days, and that was before God sent the flood and told Noah to build the ark. So these stories persist throughout major religious religions throughout the world. But not only that, but of course other mythologies as well. There are stories of giants referenced in Norse mythology, Greek mythology, Roman mythology. All of these, of course, these were essentially religions in their time as well. All told stories of these giants as if they really did exist and they really shared the earth with people. So there seems to be enough, at least very early on, to think, okay, well, at least at the time, people truly believed that giants were on this planet, at least on Earth. The question remains, were they basing these stories of giants, were they all based on eyewitness testimony, people actually seeing them, being with them, or were they based on skeletal remains? Because certainly if they perhaps came across skeletal remains of a particular dinosaur or something along those lines, that we could be looking at certainly some confusion there. So as we look and explore the phenomena, the giants, it becomes difficult to determine what exactly we're truly dealing with. Certainly, in recorded history, there are stories of very, very unusually tall people. The tallest person ever recorded history was Robert Wadlow from Illinois, in the U.S., and he was almost 9 feet tall. He was just short of 9 feet tall. So. And there's certainly a number of other cases of plenty of people who are over 8 feet tall. Now, a lot of times there was a lot of associated health issues and problems, and certainly speculated there were some tumors in the brain that regulated growth. So some of these individuals that had these health dysfunctions didn't necessarily come from very big families, but this was just a medical issue. There are cases, however, of individuals who did come from very large families in and of themselves. I know one instance, I cannot remember this particular gentleman's name, but his mother was over 7 feet tall. So there are cases where there are some individuals who are just truly that tall, and happen so through natural, at least what appears to be somewhat natural means, not necessarily through some sort of medical issue. However, in most cases with people who are that large, the lifespans are significantly shorter, not only because of existing health issues, but other health issues that come along. So we have these stories that we know of people who've grown to these extraordinary heights, but it's unclear as to whether or not this was part of any particular genetic line or a group of individuals who were just that tall. That's a little unclear. However, there does seem to be a possibility there. I'm not a geneticist, and I can't say that I know every single thing about the subject, but it would seem to me that we're looking at a chance that if, in fact, giants did exist, well, what is it that we're actually looking at? Are we looking at a specific different race? Are they different from humans? Are they perhaps an offshoot in the evolutionary cycle, right? The way that some people argue what Sasquatch is, right? Well, which leads us to another possibility. Perhaps Sasquatch and giants are one and the same. Well, then that opens up a whole other story, and I'll get to that later on. So, looking at some of the stories about giants, one story in particular, it really kind of captured my attention. Now, this story, it revolves around, and bear with me for my pronunciation here, because I'm not 100% certain, but revolves around, I believe, the Paiute Indians, Native Americans, located in this desert southwest in Nevada region of the United States. Now, this story, these Native Americans, this tribe, they spoke of and had tales of these red-haired giants that lived in the area with them, and that these red-haired giants were cannibals. They would routinely kidnap members of their tribe and consume them. They spoke of these tales for a number of years. So the question is, at that point, they decided that they had to do something. They decided that they were losing too many people. So all of the native tribes in the area banded together in an effort to try to get rid of these giants. Well, what they had done was that they launched a coordinated attack against the giants, and a few of them managed to retreat into a cave. At which point they would not come out, and so the Native Americans decided that they would gather as much brush as possible and set it in the entrance of the cave and light it on fire, with the effort to either smoke them out or force them to come out into the flames. And for those who did come out, they would be slaughtered rather quickly via the number of Native Americans with arrows and whatnot. They were prepared to slaughter any of them that actually came out of the cave. And as it turned out, they did kill all of the giants. At least that was the suspicion. They never came out, and they had believed that they had killed them all, that the smoke had killed those who didn't come out. So, not too long after that, there was an earthquake at which the cave was subsequently caved in, and it wasn't until 1911 that a company that was mining guano came across this cave and discovered some of these remains. And this story, it for some reason or another, it's a rather popular one, but it's also one that insists that the truth behind these giants was covered up, that it was more or less pushed to pushed to the side, kind of forget about it, because, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but the argument here is that this is a case where this story has been held from the truth, is being held back from the people as much as possible. Now, there's also numerous reports of giant skeletons being found in mound builder regions of the United States. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, places where these burial mounds have been found. They have also found, some at least claims have people have found giant skeletons in these areas as well. So these stories persist consistently. And one of the most intriguing stories came out just around the same period as the Paiute Indian story. And that was in May of 1912, the New York Times ran a report that approximately 18 skeletons were found in Wisconsin, 18 giant skeletons. Now, the intriguing thing is that in many of these skeletons that have been found, of course, it's been red hair, it's been blonde hair. It's not been hair that you would see common with Native Americans. So it leads many to question and wonder, what is the circumstance here? What is going on here? Why are these numerous? And this is the thing; these aren't just little stories told here and there. These were reported in newspapers at the time. Okay, the most popular newspapers at the time ran these stories, and they truly believed and had plenty of reason to suspect that what they saw were giant human skeletons. Now, there are some who question the veracity of whether or not that's the case, and this is certainly up for debate because at this point, there are no remains that we can find, and it doesn't seem to fit the current existing paradigm as to how North America was settled. So if it doesn't fit, then, and there's no evidence, then it doesn't get considered. So we're looking at a situation where there's literally tens to not, if not hundreds of stories from the late 1800s to the early 1900s of giant human skeletons being found. So when we're talking about giants, are we really talking about something that was just a myth? Well, for those who are consistent with believing that they will only look at physical evidence, well, then that becomes a little harder. And I'll explain why that is here momentarily. There are those who argue that the Smithsonian Institute, which is routinely called, was routinely in these cases where they found these giant skeletons. Certainly, they usually get a phone call about dinosaur skeletons that are found, and certainly this was also the case with these giant human skeletons. They were found, Smithsonian was called, and they dealt with it. Well, the theory, at least the conspiracy theory behind this, claims that the Smithsonian Institute has full knowledge and knows with unequivocally that giants did in fact exist, and that they were throughout North America and quite possibly elsewhere, and that this truth they are withholding from the people because, quite frankly, it does not fit the existing idea of what is the current accepted belief that European Americans, or at least were the first to come to the North Americas, and that they came here during the age of exploration, and the earliest accounts, of course, were, at least at this point, appear to be the Vikings and Leif Erikson settling into Newfoundland. But there certainly seems to be plenty of reason to suspect that perhaps some of these Nordic peoples were in North America much earlier. And for that matter, there seems to be enough evidence to suggest that perhaps that maybe, at least some argue, that these are people who came during the Ice Bridge era, much like people who went from Asia into Alaska, into Canada, through across the Bering Strait. It's believed that there are also people who perhaps made the migration from the Nordic areas into North America during a time of extreme cold and ice. So there's some interesting possibilities here. Maybe, just maybe, these giants were indigenous to North America. Maybe they came from someplace else. Maybe they did come from the Nordic areas and came across. Or maybe we just don't really know much about our origins, which would seem to be the more likelihood in this particular case. Are these giants people? These huge, and let me be clear when I say giants, I mean there's reports of up to 36 feet tall. 36 feet tall. Now, if in fact that's true, that's ridiculous. That is insanely tall. Many of the other reports are 15 feet tall, 20 feet tall. Some of the smallest giant reports you hear about are 9 feet tall, in that range. So the question of, well, is there been some exaggeration in some of these stories? Well, that would seem highly likely, right? Perhaps, when you're talking about people whose average height was 5 foot or a little under, well, then a giant wouldn't need to be extremely tall, at least by our standards. A giant would be, I'm 6.5 feet tall. So if I were going back 200 to 300 years ago, I would have been seen as being freakishly tall, while as right now I'm just considered a tall person. So the perception is key in this, and that's something that we really can't answer for. It's hard to say. But nevertheless, there are a number of old pictures depicting what appears to be, and these appear to be undoctored, individuals who are massively tall and seem to fit the paradigm that they could in fact be giants. And there are many, and as I said, there are those who claim that the Smithsonian sees this as a threat because they cannot explain it. And so because it does not fit with the accepted paradigm, they basically hide these remains in the lowest levels where nobody has access to them, and that's where they stay, because they don't fit the paradigm. Or they may point to some other things as well, and I'll get into that shortly. So, what exactly, if in fact, giants did exist, what were they? And, were they human? Were they just a type of human? Were they just a really freakishly tall people? Were they some sort of offshoot of human? As I had suggested earlier, there are those who think that perhaps these giants were, or at least the descendants of giants, are Sasquatch. And that would be an intriguing theory if, in fact, that were to turn out to be true. Obviously, we know that, at least from the reports of Sasquatch, they can be very tall. There are some that are reported as being, the younger are being reported as short, but there are those who report 8 feet, 9 feet tall Sasquatch, which would be on the shorter end in terms of some of the giant lore, but nevertheless would still seem to fall in the line with the possibility that perhaps the Sasquatch, the few that are remaining out there, are in fact actually these remnants of giants that seem to, at least one point in time in our early recorded history, that our ancestors believed actually did walk the earth. So that's an intriguing theory, that if in fact giants are real, perhaps they are related to the mythical Sasquatch. And it's an interesting thought, but once again, it's just a theory, it's just a thought. We have no evidence to support any of this. One of the more common theories about the giants, and this connects back to the biblical stories, are that these giants are what are referred to as the Nephilim, where that they are actually the product of offspring between humans and fallen angels that God had cast out of heaven. And the individuals who argue for this sort of tale with the giants are that these were basically demonic peoples. That half of them was demon, half of them was human, and certainly you can relate that to some of the old Greek stories of the demigods, right? That were extremely strong, incredibly powerful, had these gifts and abilities, but were also mortal in certain respects. So perhaps that these were, human and part human and part supernatural. That is part fallen angel. And and furthermore, there are these same individuals argue that perhaps that these Nephilim are connected to the end times. That it states that God has chained them, has banished them to heaven, but in the end times these Nephilim will walk the earth again. So that's a kind of a creepy story, if in fact that does end up remaining to be true. That these giant remains that we're finding are actually a hybrid between some sort of demon and human. Once again, little evidence other than biblical stories to support this, but it's another intriguing possibility that perhaps that these giants weren't just human, and that explains a lot of their freakish abilities. They're often the stories of their immense strength. And having other abilities, in some cases, would seem to lead to the possibility that perhaps we are dealing with something that's not just quite human. So there are many of those out there in the realm that are exploring these stories that believe that these are the Nephilim. Now, perhaps I think the most intriguing story, and in many ways people connect this next story to the Nephilim as well, is that perhaps these giants, that there's a connection to the Anunnaki here. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Anunnaki or haven't listened to my episode on the ancient astronaut theory, the Sumerians, which have one of the oldest recorded written languages, they spoke of their creators as coming down from the heavens, and they called them the Anunnaki, and that they were the ones who created man. And it is believed that, much like the Nephilim are this product of fallen angels and humans, that these giants are in fact the product of the Anunnaki and the human in humans, that they're an offspring between these alien creators and these human individuals, in most cases female. So there are those who argue that the giants are in fact part human, part extraterrestrial, once again explaining perhaps some of the theories behind their size and their strength, particularly when you're looking at some of the immense heights believed and has been reported to have come in 36 feet. It's ridiculous. That almost seems outlandish to me. But then again, the idea of giants, period, well, maybe perhaps that's a little outlandish. Nevertheless, there's enough here that I think we have to consider the possibility that perhaps they did exist at one point. Or, if you believe that the Sasquatch are related, then perhaps they still do exist. They're just not exactly what they used to be. So, a number of theories here. Giants were just a freakishly tall set of humans. Giants were an offspring in the evolution, that they were perhaps related to the Gigantopithecus, which was a very giant primate, which many people often relate to Sasquatch. That perhaps there's a Sasquatch relation here, or perhaps these giants are in fact a byproduct of fallen angels and humans, and that they are demonic and evil, and of course they eat people, and that this story, that in this framework, that they will return in the end times to wreak havoc on humanity again. And then there are those who argue that these are in fact the byproduct of the Anunnaki and the human. That, and much like the Nephilim story, that here these extraterrestrial creators, created this offspring, with mankind, and that ultimately it was these same extraterrestrial creators discussed in the Sumerian lore that sent the flood and would wipe out, at least attempt to wipe out, these these offspring between human and Anunnaki, as was, of course, the case in the Nephilim story. There's a lot of overlap between the Nephilim and the Anunnaki, which is why there are those who say it's really one and the same, that these Nephilim are the byproduct of the Anunnaki and the human, that they are in fact the fallen angels. And that could be almost a whole other show in and of itself. But nevertheless, there's a number of these theories. So, to sum up, in my research here, I have always had a fascination with giants. I have. I've always thought it was intriguing, and as a kid, I always thought perhaps that this is just not just a story you'd hear about in the Bible. So I thought, well, perhaps it's real. And then I get older and I think, there's no way it could happen. But then, researching some of these stories and some of the people who claimed, look, we found these skeletons. As a matter of fact, in my hometown, a prominent physician found a very large human skeleton that was out of the norm, approximately it was a little over about 100 years ago now. And I grew up as a kid hearing that story. So there's a number of stories out there and a number of people who contend, yes, giant humans existed. And perhaps they still do in the form of Sasquatch. But there's a number of people who claim, yes, these existed. We have found these skeletons. Why the Smithsonian won't talk about it? Why the intellectual world refuses to accept that these things existed? Why they're repressing the truth? That's a number of interesting questions. If in fact this is real, my own belief, I believe that giants did walk the earth, and perhaps Sasquatch is some sort of relation. As to what giants were, I have no clue. There are those who, I would seem to think that there would seem to be a strong contention that perhaps there is some sort of relation with the Sasquatch here. The problem that we're dealing with is that we're dealing with the potential for a lot of exaggeration and a difficulty to really gain adequate perception of what a giant was. A giant could have been someone who was 7 feet tall. A giant could have been someone who was 6.5 feet tall, 6 feet tall, depending on the time period. So it's difficult to really say who a giant was based on perception. But I am of the belief that giants did walk this earth. What they were they offspring of fallen angels and humans, offspring of alien creators and humans? Were they some sort of offshoot in evolution, or were they just a freakishly tall group of human beings? I don't know. In some of those reports, it doesn't seem like they were human, at least not completely human. The teeth don't seem to match up right. They have an extra row of teeth. So it leads me to believe that if I'm forced to pick what I think the likely explanation for what these giants were, is that they were probably some sort of primate through evolution, some sort of like a Gigantopithecus, a Sasquatch-type creature. If I were to relate anything to what a giant may be, then that would perhaps be, in my opinion, the closest possibility. But of course, we're dealing with all this with very little evidence. What we have are old photographs, old newspaper clippings, and reports. Now, at the time, we can assume that, well, okay, these individuals were forthright and they were reporting what they could. So it would seem highly possible that, in fact, okay, there's something here. But what exactly it is, how reliable everything, all these stories are and the evidence, it's questionable. So there is a part of me that wants to believe, much like Fox Mulder and the X-Files, for those of you who are X-Files fans. I want to believe. I want to believe that we live in a world that has strange and unexplained things that happen. And so the idea that giants walk the earth just falls into that paradigm. Unfortunately, the evidence just isn't as strong. Nevertheless, if they did, perhaps they still do in the form of Sasquatch. But until we can find some sort of physical remains, definitively now, and someone take a YouTube video and someone post it all over their Facebook and their Twitter and their Google Plus and their LinkedIn and all these other social networks, Snapchat it to all their friends. Until that happens, there remains the likelihood that something that falls outside of the accepted paradigm may very well be repressed. So, well, that is what I have for everybody today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Once again, I apologize for my sound. I know I'm fighting this weird head cold or allergies. I'm not sure what it is, but it's the lovely Ohio weather. So, I just want to thank everybody for listening this week, bearing with me. Also, next week I've got a couple different show ideas in mind, so I'm still sort of debating where I'm going to go with that. But I'll post announcements as that comes along. In 2 weeks, I'm going to discuss. This was a topic that was sent to me a while back, and I was just really waiting for I thought was perhaps the right time. But in 2 weeks, I'm going to discuss the Shroud of Turin. So that'll be an interesting show, and I'm certain will carry a significant debate for a number of people. So tune in, and then I will update everybody next week on the topic for the show next week. So once again, thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you for continuing to support me, and thank you for all your comments on social media and YouTube and all that. So once again, thank you. Have a great week, and I'll be back with you again next Friday.